So nobody reads the abstract. There we go. So I wanted to welcome you all tonight to this talk for the Los Alamos Faith and Science Forum. So one thing that science and spirituality have in common is the ability to awe. And whether we're contemplating the miracle of a baby's smile or the reflecting on the first few moments of the Big Bang, there's much to wonder about. So what I would say is that feeling of awe is a taste of the divine, a taste of the divine essence that many of us believe is present in all of us. And the question is, what can possibly stand in the way of that feeling? Why would it ever be blocked? It can be blocked when we treat people badly. If we don't treat people well, then that can alienate us from other people and from the divine. So to avoid that, every spiritual tradition, just about every spiritual tradition, teaches ethics and virtue. And there's one particular virtue, altruism, that is particularly important. So altruism is the virtue that places the welfare of others above oneself, and it often is seen in self-sacrifice in the service to one's family or tribe or society as a whole. So each of the great religions teaches altruism, and which is what I just said. Each of the world's great religions teaches altruism. Christianity regards altruism as an expression of Christ. It's Christ's teaching. Christ said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." And a second is like this: "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus taught, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And he said of his own sacrifice, "Greater love than this one has, greater love than this no one has, that someone lay down his life for his friends." In Judaism, they teach a principle that comes from the belief that we are all created in the image of God, and that to disrespect that is not appropriate. It said, "So God created humankind in his own image." And Judaism also teaches, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Islam teaches selfless generosity with phrases from the Quran like this one: "They give preference to others over themselves, even though they themselves are in need. And whoever is protected from the greed of his soul, it is they who are the successful." Islam also teaches love for others in the spirit of the Golden Rule. "None of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself." Hinduism teaches selfless service to others. That's a principle that's actually one of the paths to enlightenment, is selfless service. Service in which you don't seek a reward or recognition or anything, you just serve. It's said in the Bhagavad Gita, "You have a right to action alone, but never to its fruits. Let not the fruits of your action be your motive, nor let your attachment be to inaction." And elsewhere in the Gita it says, "Therefore always perform the work that must be done without attachment, for by performing action without attachment, one attains the supreme." And so whenever you see a capital letter, that's referring in these Eastern traditions, that's referring to the one, the ultimate reality. And another passage from the Gita, and he who sees all beings in the self, so the self is capitalized, meaning we're talking about the absolute, not one's individual self, which is a reflection. He who sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings, never turns away from them. When to the knower all beings have become one with his own self, what delusion, what sorrow can there be? And lastly, as a Buddhist, I recognize that Buddhism has a special place for altruism. It's said in one of the sutras, just as a mother would protect her only child with her own life, so should one cultivate a boundless heart toward all beings. In Buddhism, there's actually what are called four faces of altruism, or four faces of love with a capital L, meaning altruistic love. Loving kindness, that's wishing happiness for others. There's compassion, opening one's heart to another's suffering. There's sympathetic joy, which is delighting in another's good fortune. How often do we do that? What prevents us from doing that? And there's equanimity, which is just another name for wisdom. It's the wisdom to see that we are all in this together. So, my understanding of Buddhism, of altruism from my Buddhist studies made me wonder what science has to say about altruism. Is there any scientific basis for self-sacrifice? And the inspiration for giving the talk actually came from my interest in that, and so I went looking for a book, and I found this wonderful book called The Altruism Equation. So it has altruism and equation in the title, so that sounds like it would be appropriate. And what it does is it traces a kind of a history through the interest in where this behavior of self-sacrifice actually originates. And it's really a remarkable book. It's especially nice because it gives detailed biographies of all the people who participated in this discovery. Here, goodness specifically refers to altruism. So, from here, the first person we run into is Darwin. So the connection to altruism in science begins with On the Origin of Species. And I think just about everybody here knows something about the theory of natural selection, and as Darwin described it. Even before Darwin published, his friend Alfred Lord Tennyson, the poet who Darwin knew, had seemed to anticipate the theory, Darwin's theory, in a poem in which he eulogized a friend and used this phrase, describing nature as red in tooth and claw. Okay, so that kind of sums up the theory of natural selection. But although Darwin was confident in his theory, there was something he encountered that bothered him quite a lot. He was thinking that if nature favored survival of the fittest, if it was truly red in tooth and claw, how did you account for the evolution of social creatures like bees? And there's lots of social creatures, the ones like bees who are highly social, and that sociability extends to their whole social structure, are called eusocial. So that's like really social. So if it favored survival of the fittest individual is what Darwin means. How could Darwin account for the evolution of creatures like bees who are fiercely altruistic? So if you approach a beehive and threaten it, you will be met with resistance by bees that are willing to sacrifice their own lives in order to protect the colony. Where did that come from? Okay. He called this his one special difficulty. And he thought about it a lot, and he decided that he really needed to understand what this meant for his theory. So he felt he really had to address it. He addressed this issue of the bees, if you want to say that. He had to address this issue of social behavior, and particularly altruism. And so the really interesting thing about Darwin, which I think you'll find in many great scientists, is that they have this incredible intuition. So they write what they discover, they talk about it, they publish their works, and then they have all this intuition left over. So to address this, what he called his one special difficulty, he actually extended his thinking further, and that's reflected partly in Origin and partly in a later book called The Descent of Man. So here's how he looked at this problem. He said, selection may be applied to the family as well as to the individual, and thus may gain the desired effect. So in this, he's saying natural selection selects on the family as a whole, or selects on members of the family. Okay? So this was an incredible intuition. And later he argued, and it's my job to keep up with these things. There we go. Later in Descent of Man, he argued that a tribe including many members who were always ready to aid one another and to sacrifice themselves for the common good would be victorious over most other tribes. And this would be natural selection. Okay. So the first selection within the family, it came to be known as kin selection, altruism in favor of one's kin. This one came to be known as group selection. And they are both, at least in the originator's mind, forms of natural selection. And then we'll describe why that's natural. So one of the problems that comes up with this kind of thinking is the problem of what's called the free rider. Okay, so if altruistic members of a tribe, if there are altruistic members of a tribe who will do anything to protect the tribe, what do you do with the free rider that only cares about themselves? Okay, and they abound. So later in Descent, he said, each man would soon learn that if he aided his fellow men, he would commonly receive aid in return. Okay, you get what you give. The habit of performing benevolent actions certainly strengthens the feeling of sympathy. But another more powerful stimulus is afforded by the praise and the blame of our fellow men. So in other words, the way to handle the free rider, to handle selfishness, is to point them out. And then that creates disapproval, and that can be strong enough to keep things in check. So Darwin just kept going. He, from this kind of thinking, he developed what is sometimes called his moral theory. And it's a very interesting form of moral thinking in that it's sort of from the ground up. So he goes back to natural selection, and he says, you know, whatever has come from natural selection came about because it was useful in some way. We have these various affections. I will try to keep up. We have these various social instincts that have been selected for because there is sociability in human life. And there are things like sympathy, affection, parental care, pleasure in the company of others, and distress at separation. And so he builds up from this a moral theory, and he writes, any animal, whatever, endowed with well-marked social instincts would inevitably acquire a moral sense or conscience as soon as his intellectual powers had become well developed. Okay. So in other words, particularly in humans, and we can't speak for all species, but particularly in humans have memory. They feel the sting of disapproval. They feel sympathy and affection when people approve of them. And so that drives them to behave in ways that are more altruistic, more moral, you might say, than otherwise. Okay. So here you see in the little pictures I found primates, and if you like Jane Goodall, you may recall that she saw a lot of these same traits, social instincts, in the chimpanzees that she studied, and later in the gorillas. So then what happened? Well, fighting broke out. I love this picture. You can't have a better picture of mayhem than this picture. Sorry. Oh, that's better. So this kind of opposition occurred very soon after.
It's blinking on and off. I'm trying to figure out why. Anyway.
Is it because they touched something? You can't let me touch anything. So there was a lot of fighting when Origin and then Descent of Man came out, and on from there. There was religious opposition right away because it literally contradicted the accounts from Genesis of the origin of creation. There was opposition from philosophers because they felt, and as well as from the religious, because they felt that the theory would undermine morality and purpose and society in general. And there was opposition and misunderstanding from scientists themselves, who were just didn't understand the theory. Now remember, when Darwin wrote this theory, there was no idea of genetics. There were no ideas of genetics. There were no genes. Mendel wouldn't publish for several years after, and people didn't read Mendel for decades after that. So nobody knew about alleles or genes or anything, okay? What Darwin had was this intuition that was prevalent at the time as well, and this is part of how he developed his theory. He said, well, I can see the resemblance between parents and their offspring, except they seem to be blended in some way. And that was basically all he knew about genetics. So even among people who liked Darwin, read his work, were fans of Darwin, there was conflict, okay? So the most famous of these conflicts was between Thomas Henry Huxley, the grandfather of Aldous, and a Russian prince who gave up his wealth to become a social anarchist. His name was Kropotkin. So both were serious, respected scientists and naturalists. Okay, so even though he was an anarchist, Kropotkin was a scientist. People respected him as a naturalist. And these two clashed violently. I mean, they didn't actually throw anything at each other, but they did throw some criticism at each other. Thomas Huxley earned the name Darwin's bulldog, because whenever anybody criticized the theory, Huxley would pop up and say, well, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about. And he wrote an essay called The Struggle for Existence and Its Bearing Upon Man, where he described natural selection as a gladiator show of individual competition where only the strongest survive. Okay. You've all seen Gladiator, right? So you know what I'm talking about. He was a staunch defender would have been a staunch defender of altruism as being a product of natural selection. If it existed at all as a social trait, it would be a product of natural selection. And he believed that because of the way natural selection worked, that it would be selected from the family, the immediate kin of the individual. So Kropotkin didn't like that at all. So one reason he was a social anarchist is because he lived in Russia. And Russia was just not working. And he felt like that was just, there had to be something better in terms of social architecture. So he felt that the government was the problem, and that's why he was a social anarchist. He was more inclined to think of altruism as coming from group selection in the way that Darwin described. So these things just didn't come out of their heads. It came out of Darwin's head and then were interpreted differently by these two. Both did extensive field work. So when Huxley did field work, he saw natural selection all over the place. And when Kropotkin did field work, he saw mutual aid all over the place. Okay, and they just were different. Eventually, they did resolve their differences. For Kropotkin, it came from a book that he wrote called Mutual Aid, A Factor in Evolution, where he got to not only talk about evolution in the way he saw it, but to talk about society in the way he saw it, about politics. So that made him happy. And that truce has been... So basically what we're talking about here is a nature-nurture controversy. Okay, so if it's nature, it's natural selection, of a direct kind. And if it's nurture, it's more like the indirect selection for a group of potentially unrelated individuals. So, the next chapter in the story brings us to a highly acclaimed scientist. Okay, this was Warder Clyde Alley. Warder Clyde Alley. He got his Ph.D. in zoology from the University of Chicago. In those days, the University of Chicago didn't care if you came back as a professor. There are other colleges that don't like that, but they were happy to have Alley. He published very prolifically. And so he returned as an associate professor in 1921, and then as a full professor in 1928. And over a very distinguished career, he produced more than 200 papers and co-authored a dozen books. So this was no slouch. But Alley happened to be a Quaker, and because of that, his interpretation of evolutionary theory was a lot like Kropotkin's. He really wanted to believe that cooperation could occur among unrelated individuals, because if it can't do that, then what's society going to do? Okay, society has to accommodate unrelated individuals, and we want cooperation. So during Alley's time at the University of Chicago, the zoology department actually came into the science of ecology came into fashion. So ecology was a relatively new science then, and the concern of the day had to do with effects of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so one of the effects of the Industrial Revolution is that we live in cities. And one of the effects of living in cities is that they're crowded. Okay, so the population density can be high. So there was a particular concern in the day, about overcrowding cities. So Alley did experiments to test whether cooperation would emerge from the stress of crowding, or whether it was all bad. Okay, so he had a notion that basically people would respond to crowding, or anything would respond to crowding, by cooperating up to a point. And he was one of the first people to actually do experiments on altruism and cooperation. He used pill bugs. So you see a picture of pill bugs there. You will also see them crowding. And they're crowding up to the point where they can't really crowd anymore. The reason pill bugs do that, and the reason it's a good animal model for this, is because they aggregate to conserve moisture. They are originally ocean-born crustaceans. And so if they dry out, they die. And if times are harsh, then they aggregate in order to conserve moisture. They were also really good animal models because they bred really quickly, and they're easy to keep. I mean, what does it take to keep a pill bug? Basically, you can't get rid of them. So they're kind of like his version of the fruit fly. So he wanted to know if aggregation in pill bugs, which seemed like a simple form of cooperation, would improve their survival under conditions of low moisture. And he knew they were sensitive to it. So he did that experiment. He found that they did actually survive much more easily in this aggregate form if he actually took the pile apart and left a single pill bug on a wet piece of filter paper, it would die. Okay. So he knew that worked. He also studied cooperation among other species that were known not to be social and not to be related. He found that goldfish, if you put enough goldfish in a tank, they'll form a school, and they actually are much happier in a school. Not very many people are happy in school, but that's okay. So they are happier, which you can tell by just seeing how they swim. So they swim in a very contented way when they're schooling, but not so much when they're alone. So don't keep a lonely goldfish. And he found this all over the place. He found it in mussels. Mussels actually aggregate. They don't move around a lot, but they do aggregate as a way of protecting themselves from the hazards of wave action. So he found this kind of cooperation everywhere, and he published many of these findings in something called Animal Aggregations, a study in general sociology. So you see two things here. First, that he publishes a lot, that he likes aggregation as a form of cooperation, and that he thinks that this is a form of sociology. Okay, and that's gonna turn up later as well in the field of sociobiology. So he did have a blind spot that he admitted. He didn't test for the relatedness of individuals within a group. As a Quaker, he didn't want to go there. He didn't want to go to a theory that depended on blood relationship, because that would not help society in the large. Okay. So this is a time when the field of what's called mathematical biology now came to the fore. This is interesting for us because Los Alamos Natural Laboratory is one of the premier places in the country to do mathematical biologists. We have several well-renowned mathematical biologists at the lab. One of the first things that stirred this up was a controversy about how evolution worked. There were basically two somewhat distinct theories of evolution, and people who advocated for them. So the first group were called the selectionists. Okay, so they felt that natural selection happened when there was random mutation in whatever it was. Okay, Darwin didn't know about genes, but these guys did. And so the selectionists felt like it was all just random mutation and selection based on the environment. Then there was another group called the Mendelians. Okay, and the Mendelians were a little bit different. The Mendelians said, look, if I cross a tall pea plant with a short pea plant, I'll always get a tall pea plant. I mean, that's just selection. And so the problem was not that these people thought differently, it all worked. The problem was nobody knew exactly how it worked. It was hard to synthesize that understanding. And that led to a particular kind of mathematical study called population genetics. Here in this figure, you see a different mathematical study. You see the solutions to the Lotka-Volterra equation, which is about predators, the relationship between predators and prey. So into this field comes a really amazing individual named J.B.S. Haldane, FRS, Fellow of the Royal Society. He was also an officer in the Black Watch in World War I, which is no easy thing to be, and was very proud of it. He actually attributed some of his papers in attribution to J.B.S. Haldane, FRS, Black Watch. But he was a really remarkable character. He made foundational. He was what you would call a true polymath. Okay, so he took no science degrees. He had no degree in science whatsoever. He had degrees in math and classics. Okay, but he made fundamental contributions to population genetics, physiology, biochemistry, statistics, in spite of his training, or maybe because. And he was also not just a scientist, but a science writer, a popular science writer, and a science fiction writer. So you can, if you like science fiction, you can go out and find some stories by Haldane. His ability, intellectual ability, was extremely versatile. He was able to master just about anything he chose. And that led a Cambridge students to once say of him, he seemed to be the last man who might know all there is to be known. Okay. He was very colorful. When he was once asked by someone this leading question, when he was asked, what can an evolutionary biologist tell us about God? He said, God must have an inordinate fondness for beetles, because there are like 350,000 species of beetles at the time. He was also the person who originated the quip, my own suspicion is that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. So his relevance to population genetics is over the years 1924 to 34, he published 10 brilliant papers on population genetics. And all of them had the same heading, the same title, A Mathematical Theory of Natural and Artificial Selection. So with these papers, he established his reputation as in mathematical biology and population genetics. There were three founders recognized as founders of population genetics. Fisher was also a polymath and a remarkable person. He's considered the father of modern statistical science because of his publications. He wrote a book called The Genetical Theory of Natural Selection. This was actually the book that resolved the dispute between the selectionists and the Mendelians. He just worked out the math. That's what he did. And Wright was also a pioneer in population genetics, looking at how chance alters gene frequencies in populations. So Haldane was actually likely to be the first person that selected that there was a cost-benefit analysis that might work for the natural selection of altruism. And he actually said as much in a very brief paper that appeared in something called Population Genetics. So he had all the ingredients that he needed to produce a theory of altruism, but never did. He just wasn't that interested, given all that he had to do to pursue that particular aim. So that theory would come from a scientist named William D. Hamilton. So this is Hamilton, handsome man. He was born in Cairo, Egypt, to New Zealand-born parents. And he grew up in the woods of Kent, England. And because he was free to roam about and just be a little naturalist, he became extremely interested in butterflies and insect collections. His father, A.M. Hamilton, was an engineer, and his mother was a doctor, one of the first women to become a doctor. But she gave that up to raise the family. Let's see. Hamilton's great aunt gave him her old insect collection and also lent him a book that was a translation of a French naturalist named Jean-Henri Fabre. And then at the age of 12, his parents gave him a book on butterflies by E.B. Ford. That book actually introduced him to genetics, particularly Mendelian genetics, and modern evolutionary theory. So these just, he was this really precocious young fellow, and the sparks just kept flying. He was educated at a private boarding school where his keen interest in mathematics and biology were noted. He actually was awarded a book as a prize for being an exceptional student. What book do you think he chose? It was The Origin of Species. He later attended St. John's College, Cambridge, and did some of his early groundwork on insects and developed some of his ideas on altruism. For Hamilton, St. John's turned out to be kind of a dud. There were lots of biologists there. They just weren't interested in the kind of biology he was interested in. They didn't even appear to be interested in evolution at all. So eventually he did get his Ph.D. from the University of London, and it was kind of a split degree because he had actually, he was able to actually pursue his own interests in biology. And he also became interested in economics, and so he was given a fellowship at the London School of Economics. And you'll see that there's a tie-in there when we talk about his theory. So he was fascinated by the founders of population genetics, particularly Haldane. He felt like after reading Haldane's suggestions on altruism that he was on the right track. He couldn't imagine for the world why he didn't do anything with it. But he did read Haldane. He also checked his math, which is not an easy thing to do. That's how you know he was quite a mathematician. And then he used his own intuition to develop his own theory about altruism based on what was then called kin selection, selection within the family. So this was a painstaking mathematical analysis. His papers came out in two parts in 1964 and 1965. They were both called The Genetical Evolution of Social Behavior 1 and 2. It came out in two parts because there was this fellow named John Maynard Smith, who was also a geneticist and was a really brutal reviewer. So the paper number 1 was rejected and was asked for improvements. He made improvements and Maynard didn't like them. He said, you should do this and you should split it into two papers. Okay. So that's how it became 1 and 2. The mathematics in those papers are very challenging. I've got copies of the first one. I can't make heads or tails of it. I know what the equations say. I don't know the reasoning behind it. But it did resolve, his main result resolved in something that is now called Hamilton's rule. It's a very simple rule. So we can talk about it. And it has had a really enduring influence on the field of not just the origin of altruism, but on fields like sociobiology and other behavioral explanations of behavioral traits. So here's the basic idea. When an altruist risks their life to benefit another individual, there has to be an evolutionary advantage for it. In other words, the genes have to be able to make more copies of themselves, even if something nasty happens to the altruist. Okay? So the rule is this, you can see it on the screen. It's C is less than R times B, okay? So in this, C is the cost to the altruist, which might be dead, right? B is the benefit to future generations, okay? And R is a relatedness parameter. It's a free parameter that ranges between 0 and 1, where 1 is me, and 1/2 is my child, and 1/4 is my nephew, and so on. Basically, it was, what was the last of the 3 geneticists? It was us, right, yeah, right. He actually developed a theory, a simple theory of relatedness that resolved into basically any of your descendants are 1/2 to the n, where n is the generation. So both the cost and the benefit are in what are called fecundancy units. Fecundancy units. I mean, when I first heard that term, I thought, that sounds like something weird you might find in an apartment complex. But who am I? Fecundancy units are units of generational offspring. So if you have 2 offspring, that's 2 units. And they count by relatedness as 1/2 each. So the degree of relatedness can be tricky to calculate. That's one of the first things you have to do. This is a quip from Haldane, who understood these things, even though he didn't publish. He answered when asked, "Would I lay down my life to save my brother? No. But I would to save 2 brothers, or to save 8 cousins." Okay. So if you do the math, you can see that those both add up to 1 in terms of relatedness and benefit. Here's a much more down-to-earth example that shows the utility of something like this. Let's suppose that we have an altruist whose brother dies in a car accident. The brother has 3 kids that the altruist accepts to raise himself, which means he is giving up a fecundancy unit. He's not going to raise a child. For the chance to raise a child of his own, he's raising 3 of his brothers. And so the math in that is the cost, 1/2, the cost is 1/2. R times B is 1/4 times 3, or 3/4. And so 3/4 is better than 1/2 in these units, and so the altruist loses, i.e. wins. Okay. So that's how the rule works. It's a very simple rule. So I've already done that. Now I'm here. Okay. So has Hamilton's rule been tested? Okay. So there have been a lot of experimental tests on Hamilton's rule. It seems to be qualitatively consistent. These things are very hard to work out with any precision, partly because there's a lot of variability in them. And the other thing is that it's hard to control populations. So you really have to either know about a controlled population or control one if you want to do the experiment. So a very famous test was performed by an animal behaviorist named Paul Sherman in the 70s, He tested the rule on Belding's ground squirrels. Okay, so what Belding ground squirrels do, like many squirrels do, is they give warning calls, like prairie dogs do. So when there's a predator around, they'll give a warning call. That's an altruistic behavior because that calls attention to the ground squirrel. So as it turns out, just because of the way they breed, females are highly interrelated and males not so much, because the females live close to where they were born and the males just go out and kind of tomcat around. So they could be related to anybody, okay? And so what Sherman found was that females gave more alarm calls when they were provoked. And to make sure this wasn't just a female thing, he manipulated the female population a little bit, I would say humanely. He didn't shoot any of them, but he brought in strangers into the population, and he found that they called less. Okay, so these are the kinds of experiments that get performed. There are actually altruistic bacteria, and you can control their populations quite well. So some bacteria produce enzymes at a cost to themselves. It takes energy to produce these enzymes that benefit the colony of bacteria as a whole. So when relatedness is high, altruistic microbes are willing to bear the cost they produce. When relatedness is low, they don't produce very much. And in fact, you may even see what they call cheater strains arise, where they just kind of bask in the enzymes and don't do anything, and don't produce anything. We know people like that. So what we find when we look is that altruism is ubiquitous. It's not just for the bees or for humans. There are altruistic amoebas. Okay, I can't actually pronounce this scientific name, but when food runs out for this species, they will form stalks, like the kind of stalk you see there. And the stalks, whereas the others, so these are the altruists, is they form stalks. The others form spores. And the spores are carried by the stalks high in the air and then loft away, hopefully to find a better life for themselves. So then this brings up a disturbing question. Is there a dark side to Hamilton's rule? Okay. Can it actually code for evil as well as for good? It is possible for that to happen. In the literature, it's called the evolution of spite. And it's possible when individuals are able to recognize who is in their family and who is not. And what they do is they preferentially attack or harm the strangers, and that creates a condition in which that spitefulness can continue. So there's a risk to the individual for being spiteful, because when they harm other individuals, the individual could come back for revenge. So there's a risk associated with it, just like there is for altruism. But because they've suppressed the reproductive ability of this other population, that's a selective advantage, and they can go on to the next generation. So evil can evolve. So that brings us to the end. We've looked at teachings on goodness from the perspective of a lot of faith traditions. All of them teach altruism. We've followed science from natural selection through evolution, the evolution of cooperation at both the family and group level. And remarkably, as I said, that all occurred to Darwin. He had all of that in mind because of his amazing intuition about natural selection. We explored the fields of mathematical biology and population genetics. We have found an equation for altruism, how altruism may evolve in families. And we've learned the uncomfortable truth that the same rule that guides altruism may lead to evil. Okay? So we now know that both altruism and evil are natural. Okay? They are natural behaviors. So it behooves us to listen and follow our better natures. Okay? And I'm going to end this with the words of a great sage who lived in the 23rd century and fell through a wormhole at some point to be with us. And that is this gentleman. And you may remember in one of the many films that actually were filmed in the 23rd century, his saying that we must remember that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Live long and prosper.
Okay, so I have a time of questions and answers. Also, I wanted to say thank Selma as far as food for providing all the desserts for the whole summer. So there's no phone call. So.
That was a good presentation, John. You mentioned sociobiology many times, but you didn't give me any human examples.
So we had a, oh, sorry.
Does your presentation have to explain altruistic behavior during the Holocaust?
So that's the, to me that seems like it's evidently the dark side, that in the Holocaust, those who were identified as out of the group were persecuted and killed. Basically the dark side of...
I want to know why totally unrelated people risk their lives to save outsiders, to save others. How is your theory, how does this information help to explain it?
Yeah, that's not my theory. I'm just a cook. But my sense of it is that altruistic is ubiquitous in nature and in society, where it can arise because of from various causes. Okay, and that's the nature of altruism, is that one would risk one's own welfare in order to perform a service for others.
Why?
Well, so it's not the kind of thing that's easy to answer in general. In faith, the one that I know about is Buddhism. Altruism is actually the wise recognition that we're all in this together, that there's nothing that separates us. So when I serve you, I'm serving myself as well. That's the...
Can I say a word?
Well,
You won't let me say a word?
just I want to finish the thought. Yeah. The other thing is that there is evidence on the science side, from Darwin all the way to population genetics, that this kind of behavior is natural. Natural.
Okay, I look at it this way. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, we have the psychology that we do because that's helped us survive over competition, fellow humanoid type species. Okay, so if we weren't this way, if we didn't have a cooperative nature for being in the tribe, we would not exist today. Some the species that did have that cooperative nature would. That's my thought. But anyway, this is Kirk Weisbrod who wanted to add to my answer. Since I'm editing this, why not? I believe that the creator of the universe set up the natural laws so we came to be, both physically and emotionally. In past presentations, we've touched upon the amazing cooperation and empathy that has likely helped Homo sapiens survive. I see this as part of the communion of souls that transcends our physical death. Victoria has pointed out exceptional cases of altruism. How can these be explained? I doubt that a genetic survival mechanism can explain them. Many believe that it comes from a touch of the divine in our lives, and we tend to agree, and I tend to agree with that idea.
I think Nels would echo that as well, because he's looked into the anthropology of these things. Did he have a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
You were talking about bees essentially being altruistic in that they would risk their lives for the hive, right?
Yeah.
How is that different from Ukrainian soldiers?
It apparently is not. So the worker bees in the hive don't really have a choice. They're biologically predisposed to it. What I've said in the talk here is that there are different ways to look at that in humans. You can look at related individuals and say that that's how we got there. We can look at unrelated individuals and say that there are social affiliations to the group, these various kinds of affection that Darwin spoke about, that those things actually explain why a tribe or a group would be selected for.
I'm not sure I understood that answer. I just see a whole bunch of unrelated people from Ukraine risking their lives for the nation.
They're supporting the nation,
Yeah.
so that's the tribe.
And so they're just the same as bees?
No, they're not the same as bees. Bees do it because they're genetically programmed to do it. And you can argue that at some level, the Ukrainian soldiers are also genetically programmed to do that because they have that social affinity. Yes, they are. Yeah. They're eusocial. There's only one reproductive person.
You've mentioned bees as social insects, and you've even mentioned microbes. I would argue, as Ph.D. de Chardin does, if there were no internal propensity to unite, even at a prodigiously rudimentary level, indeed, in the molecule itself, it would be physically impossible for love to appear higher up with us in harmonized form. Driven by forces of love, the fragments of the world seek each other so that the world may come into being. That's Ph.D. de Chardin.
So I agree with that scientifically and spiritually.
So even on a molecular or atomic level, even on a molecular or a atomic level, particles come together in what we could interpret as love.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know it works for amoebas.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just go around and see if there are any discussions that people would like me to join in with. And in the meantime, I'll just say adios, amoebas.